Hello everyone and welcome to my session at this SQL Bits 2020 edition. I really wish we were all in London meeting, but due to the situation it's not possible, but I really hope you will still have a great time. The session we're going to cover now is how to monitor your Power BI or what's on in your Power BI environment. So sit back for the next 15 minutes and hopefully you will learn a lot about how to monitor Power BI, what to monitor and what you can then do with the data. The agenda for today is that we are going to talk a little bit about why I'm doing a session on this particular topic. Then we're going to cover the objectives of the session, which we hope we will have fulfilled when we come to the end. Then we're going to go a little bit more into each part of the monitoring and what the session is about. So we're going to start to talk a little bit more generally about Power BI governance. Then we're going to go on to the 3 areas of monitoring that I suggest, which is the Power BI settings, the artifact inventory, and the activities. And in the end, we're going to talk about how you can take all that data and do something useful with it rather than just sit on it. So why are we talking about this topic? Most of us Power BI admins, at least many people that I have met that are Power BI admins, are what we call an accidental admin. So they're not administrators by trade, but they were the first to use Power BI in their organization or the best at using Power BI in their organization. So they became the admin because doesn't really fit into other infrastructure administration in many organizations. So when you're not used to being an administrator, you're not maybe sure of what your role is as an administrator. And it's not really easy either to get the information out, especially if you want to do monitoring on Power BI. There's nothing really nicely built in. You cannot click into a portal and get all the information. You need to turn things on, turn things off, and you need to make sure that you do it correctly. So that was the main motivation behind me creating this session, that I was in that position myself, that I wanted to share my learnings with others. I also had a lot of stakeholders in the organization that were asking me for information. How is our implementation going? Who is using Power BI? Who is not using Power BI? What are they doing when they're using Power BI? And all that, all those questions, to get answers to those, you need to have the data. And that also inspired me to do this session. And then, of course, if you want to do governance, you really need to do monitoring, because it's very hard to say that you're compliant or you govern your environment if you have no idea what's being created by whom and what's being deleted and all those questions that come up when it comes to governance. So these were the motivations for the session. So the objectives for today is that I want you, when we are done with the session, I want you to understand why you should be monitoring Power BI. I want you to be able to understand what you should monitor in Power BI. And then, of course, how you can monitor Power BI, with a little bit about how you can automate that monitoring, at least partially. And then I want to also to understand, what options you have when you want to do reporting. So what could you use the data for? There's no definite answer there, but I have some ideas for you so you can maybe implement in your own organizations. To start, I want to talk a little bit broader about Power BI governance. So in my version of a Power BI governance strategy, it rests on 4 pillars. Those pillars are process, training, monitoring, and roles. Today, we are only going to touch on one of those pillars, which is monitoring. They're all very, very important, but monitoring is probably the one that is most technically complex of those 4 pillars. And it's the one that we need to have in place so we can make sure that we are in compliance with our strategy. So today we will only talk about monitoring. So before I go on, I just want to get the Power BI report server out of the way. We are going to focus on the Power BI service, so the cloud part of it, while the Power BI report server, which is the on-premise solution, we are not going to spend almost any time on that. I just want to have one slide just to, make sure that people are aware that it is possible to monitor that as well. So monitoring of the Power BI report server is fairly simple and fairly accessible. Because you have this one view in the database that's called execution log 3, which has all the data that you need to monitor it. There's a lot of information online on how to monitor reporting services, and this is the same way you will monitor it, even though it's called Power BI Report Server now, because it's built on the same technology. There's a slight difference in, there's a little bit of information missing. For example, if you look into the database and you will see the execution of a reporting services report, you could normally see that how much time went into the data fetching, how much time went into the rendering, and so on and so forth. That is not possible with Power BI. You will only get one number for Power BI reports. There's also some things in the database that are some columns that are 1, 2, 3, 4, so an integer representation of some setting. And in the documentation, it will tell you that 1 is this event, and 2 is that event, and 3 is that event. But there are a few more events that have been added now since it was called Power BI Report Server. And as far as I know, they are not documented in the documentation. So you will need to try out to figure out what those are. So it's not perfect, but it's much easier than with the cloud service. And I think with the information online, everyone should be able to go about that fairly simply. Okay. So in my session monitoring, I will touch on 3 different sections. So the first one is the Power BI admin settings, which is partially manual monitoring. Very important in my my mind, but it's not possible to fully automate that. The second one is the Power BI artifact inventory, which we can fully automate, and then there's the Power BI activities, which we can also fully automate. So I'm not saying one is more important than the other, but probably the activities are the ones that are really really important from the governance perspective. But all these have a really big role in Power BI, so I recommend that you monitor all of them. Before I go into the specifics of what we are monitoring and how we're going to do it, I just want to tell you a little bit about what you can, if you do the monitoring, what can you then do with the data? First of all, of course, it just gives you better insight into what is going on in your Power BI environment, and that is always very, very valuable. That insight might give you information about the adoption. So who is adopting fast? Who is adopting slow? How is the implementation going in general? Where are a lot of people using Power BI? Where are a few people using Power BI? How often are they using all these different things? And they can really help you focus your adoption or implementation effort. Maybe you need to support those who are moving fast better, or maybe you need to spend time on those who are moving slowly to get them up to speed. Of course, governance plays a huge part of why you do monitoring. You want to be absolutely sure that you can answer those governance questions if they come up, and also be preventive if breaches are about to happen, or if they happen, so you can close it down really, really fast. The third part you can also use this data for is license maintenance. So for example, if a user signs up for a Power BI Pro trial, you can then make sure that you have a license ready for them when the trial ends, because you have information about that. Also, if you figure out that a lot of users are not using Power BI and they have a Pro license, you can maybe reassign that license to someone else that likes to use Power BI. So there's plenty of options of what you can do with the data. Now let's dive into what and then also how. So the first section of what we're going to talk about today is the Power BI portal settings. So the admin portal, and specifically the tenant settings. But there's a lot of settings that they're always getting more and more settings in Power BI. It started with mostly the tenant settings, but now there's a lot of other settings there. But there are settings in there that we should definitely take a look at and make sure that we have made an informed decision of how they are set. So there are settings that you should modify in the tenant settings. So for example, publish to web, you need to make sure that only people who are authorized are able to do publish to web. If the audit log has not been turned on in Office 365, Microsoft 365 as it's called now, you can turn them on in the Power BI tenant settings. There are also things that you might want to monitor. So for example, exporting and sharing outside your company, push apps to end users. You might want to set up the internal help page. I find that really, really helpful to the implementation effort. And there are all other different settings that you might want to set. Now, the crux here is that if you go on and you set the settings to whatever you want, There is no way, there's nothing in Power BI that will allow you to take that data out and to document how these things are set. Now, if someone changes a setting in the tenant settings, it will be captured in the audit log. It will be captured that this setting changed to this. It won't say anything about what it changed from, and it won't say anything about what it should be. So your only option to make sure that things are set as they should be is to do a manual monitoring. So let me just show you a little bit about how it would look. So here we are in Power BI. I am signed in as a Power BI administrator, so I can go now to the wheel or to the settings, find the admin portal, and if I go into the admin portal, there are a lot of settings here. Some of them are open, some of them are locked, depending on if you have Power BI Premium, if you are a Microsoft 365 administrators. There are some things that will show up if you're there. So for example, the audit log, you cannot access that within the Power BI admin portal. I will come better to that when we come to the monitoring of activities later on. But the tenant settings are here. They are something 30, 40, tenant settings. Sometimes they will add new ones here depending on what they are. If they're putting out a new feature, those feature will often have settings with them, and they will be added here. So as I said, some of them are things that I think you should be looking at. Some of the things that you might want to look at. But my suggestion to you is that you go in here and you go to every single one of these settings. So for example, allow users to try Power BI Pro. It should be set to enabled for the entire organization. So my suggestion is you take a document, you open each one of these settings, you take an informed decision of what they should be, and you write down what that should be. This is very important if you have more than one administrator. Because as I said before, if I decide that allow users to try Power BI Pro is enabled for specific security groups, for example, if someone changes this back to entire organization, I will see that in the audit log that it has been changed, but if I can't remember what it was supposed to be, I will not be able to see that anywhere. So I will then need to, figure it out again. So my suggestion again, document all these settings, what they should be. And then the monitoring part of it, is you can decide if that should be that the Power BI admin will go in here once in a while, on a regular basis and checks if the settings are set to what they want. Or it should be, sorry. Or if you want to wait for events in the audit log and monitor that and have a notification telling you, okay, now the allow user to try Power BI Pro has been changed to this. And then you can compare that to the documentation and say, okay, is this an approved change or not? And if it's not approved, it's very easy to go back in here and change it back to what it was supposed to be because you have that documented. So this is a semi-manual process. You cannot fetch this data out. There's no way to get this data out automatically. You need to actually go in here and you need to write this down or screenshot it or whatever you want to do so you can have it in a document. So this is my suggestion for the Power BI tenant settings. And I'd say there's other settings there. You want to go to each one of these groups of settings and make sure that they're set to whatever you want them to be and that you have it documented. The next area of the Power BI monitoring that we want to talk about is the Power BI artifact inventory. So this is where you will get information from Power BI about what objects exist, what artifacts are there out there, what has changed. So for example, what workspaces exist, what reports, dashboards, datasets, data flows, data sources, gateways. So you can query the Power BI REST API to get all this information out. And if you do that regularly, you will be able to also show what has changed over time. And this can also be very important to show what the development of your artifact inventory is. So for example, if you want to document to your implementation effort that, yes, you're getting more workspaces or you're getting less workspaces, less reports, more, all these different things that you can do by getting this information out. Another thing that I find this very, very useful for is to just create a report, inventory report to share with your user base. Because a normal Power BI user who logs into the Power BI portal, they will only see workspaces, apps, reports, dashboards, and all that which has been explicitly shared with them. So they won't see anything else out there. If they don't have access, they don't see it. This often creates duplication efforts. So people will say, I need a report about this, and then I will create it, not knowing that maybe a report about the same thing, existed already beforehand. So by creating a inventory report and sharing it with all your users, you could allow them to access the report and then see everything that exists and perhaps find a report before they create one themselves. In that kind of report also you would need to explain how people will get access, because they will need to, of course, ask for access before they can view the report. But it can be very valuable to organizations to minimize the duplication effort and to help people being more productive with their time. So how do you go about doing this? Well, to get to the data about your artifact inventory, you will need to use the Power BI REST API. The Power BI REST API has different sections that will allow you to get different things. So if you look here on the left-hand side here, you will see that it has an overview which will just list everything. Then it has admin, apps, all those different things down here. As a general rule, everything that is underneath admin will allow you as an administrator to get information about the whole of the tenant. So all the reports, all the workspaces in the whole tenant. While what is in the rest of them here will allow you to get only things that you have explicit access to, even though you're an administrator. So what we normally try to focus on when we want to create this kind of artifact inventory is what is in the admin part here. So there are a bunch of endpoints in here that you can use to get things. So for example, let's take a look at, groups in this case are workspaces, because the type 1 workspace that existed in Power BI and still does exist, they were Office 365 groups. Now the modern workspaces, they are proper workspaces, but the endpoint is still called groups. And we have this endpoint here called get groups as admin. If we click on that, we will get the documentation, what is the endpoint exactly, how you can get to it, and so on and so forth. If you look closely on the list here, there are also things that are creating and changing in the Power BI service, but we are going to just focus on the ones that are reading, because we are going to talking about getting an inventory of what objects exist. So you have an endpoint here, you know what the URL for the endpoint is, and then it has a documentation about what it can do and what it cannot do, what the information does return back. I will though say that these endpoints change from time to time, especially when there's new features being added, but sometimes they change. So you will need to call them, just to check what will be returned, because sometimes the documentation here hasn't been updated fast enough, so you sometimes get more data back, which is, a great thing normally. So now we've decided, for example, now we want to see all the workspaces. We want to get the information about what workspaces exist in our organization. We then need to decide, how do we then go about getting this data? So basically there are two options. You can either build an application that has, that is a web application or something that can access those REST API endpoints, or you can use some kind of a tool that has something built in, some integration tools that can most often talk to REST API endpoints, or you can use PowerShell to call the REST API. So Microsoft has actually been very nice to us by adding PowerShell commandlets for some of those endpoints that handle all the authentication and all that different thing, and will allow you to get a nice tabular return back. So if you want, you can take a look at the commandlets. So there's the documentation here about the PowerShell commandlets. There's also a .NET client library for it if you want to create something on your own. And you will see that a commandlet is called something, then the REST API endpoint is something, and then the actual endpoint itself. And if you click on the documentation for the PowerShell, you will see that what groups of endpoints, commandlets do they have, and then examples of how to use them. It's not very difficult to use those endpoints, but there is a caveat to it, because sometimes Microsoft adds to those endpoints, adds something new to them, and then the commandlets are not updated as fast as as they could, meaning that the commandlet might return less data or less columns or whatever you want to call it than the endpoint itself will do. So you need to make make sure that that you are okay with that. Usually they get updated at some point, but you need to think about if that's what you want to do. But it makes things much easier. So if we head over to PowerShell, I'm here using PowerShell 7. You can use most of PowerShell. It's a little bit different depending on what commandlet you've been using, but most of them you can use almost all types of PowerShell. Just make sure that you read the documentation. One of the endpoints, or the commandlets they have is get Power BI Workspace. And get Power BI Workspace is exactly pointing to this get groups as admin that I showed you before. And it's handling everything that you needed to be done to connect to our REST API endpoint. So you simply just need to put this in, press enter, and you will simply get all the workspaces that you have access to. This will by default return only the first 100, but you can add an all attribute to it, which will then return all the workspaces that you have access to. Now, if you want to get all the workspaces that are in the organization, you need to add a scope organization on it. And this will only work if you are a Power BI administrator. So everyone can run those commandlets. If you're not an administrator, you will only get back to what you have access to explicitly. If you are an administrator and add the scope organization, you will get all of them. Now, in my case, I am an administrator, but I also have access to all my workspaces on the tenant, so there's no difference here, but it still is what it is. You can see that Power BI, so the commandlet, returns a nice tabular format. So if you would export this to a CSV file or something, it's going to be really nice and easy to pick this data up. The same thing exists for reports and for dashboards. So for example, if I go for here, get Power BI reports, scope organization, this will give me all the reports that exist in my tenant. So this is going to be a lot, but you can see there's an ID, the name, the web URL, the embed URL, and the dataset ID, and so on and so forth. So everything is going to be returned in a nice tabular format. Now, if you think that you're not satisfied with the commandlets, they are maybe not returning all the columns that you would like. For example, the report endpoint, I know it can return also who the owner of the report is and who last modified the report. And this is valuable data, but I don't see it here in the REST API endpoint. Sorry, in the commandlet. So you might want to think about, maybe you should call the REST API endpoint directly. And if you are a little bit like me, I'm not a developer, so I don't, develop web application or applications that can call REST API, but that's just not something that I'm capable of doing. Luckily, Microsoft have come to our rescue. They have created an endpoint called Invoke Power BI REST method, and that commandlet will allow us to call the endpoint directly without having to deal with all that, creating an application around the authentication and all these different things that can be hard when doing calling REST API endpoints. So what you need to do if you want to use this one, you need to give it the URL parameter. Of course, you need to tell it where to go, and then you need to do it. What kind of method are you getting? So are you using the get method or the post method? We are fully focused on the get method here, and here I have the URL, and it's the same URL as in this get groups as admin endpoint. So you can see it exactly here. It does require that you use the top something. It will only do top 5,000 maximum. So if you're more than 5,000 workspaces or reports or whatever, you will need to loop through them, by whatever, no matter if you're in PowerShell or if you're anything else. But so you can use this one, invoke Power BI REST method, give it the URL and then the method, and then you are going directly against the endpoint. You don't have to worry about the commandlet not giving you everything back, or you don't have to worry about, if you want to rather use if there's no commandlet for that endpoint you want to go, you can use this one here. If I run this, what you will see is the difference here is that, instead of giving you a nice tabular format, this will give you a JSON back, because the REST API will give you JSON back, while the commandlets, they have they have taken the JSON, they have, tabularized it. So if you do get the JSON back, then you will of course need to figure out, how you wanna how you wanna work with that. What do you wanna do to make that, work for you? You need to parse it in some way. Okay, so that is the one. There was one other thing I want to mention here with this REST API endpoint, specifically the get groups as admin endpoint. So the get groups as admin endpoint gives you all the workspaces. But think about if you get all the workspaces, what do you want if you want to chain together reports and workspaces, or datasets and workspaces, or datasets and reports and workspaces. So if you want to chain all these things together, you will need to loop through it. You need to get all my workspaces, and then for all my workspaces, get all my reports, because there's an endpoint for reports in a group. There's an endpoint for get data sources in a group. For example, this one here, get data sets in groups as admin. So there you need to tell it what group it is or workspace it is. So that needs to, we need to loop. But what Microsoft have done, again, to help us a little bit out, they have added to this endpoint here an expand attribute or parameter. And that expands allow you to, get related objects. So for example, in the workspace here, this is really the only place you have it, is that you can get the users, the reports, the dashboards, the dataset, the data flows, and workbooks that exist for this particular workspace. So instead of having to loop, you can simply go on and get it. So let me show you how that might look, and I'll show you how the output might look. So if I go back here, I'm going to clear my screen. So here I have again Invoke Power BI REST methods. I have the URL, which is exactly the same until here. And now I add the expand parameter and tell it, give me all the reports, dashboard, dataset, users, data flows. Now, this is going to be a lot of data, so I'm just going to, make it a little bit smaller, just so you can see easier to see. Let's just get all the reports in this particular workspace, or sorry, in all the different workspaces. So if I run this, you will see that I have well, let's just go down here. So let me find one where so some of them are personal workspaces, and if they have personal workspace, personal workspace here, they are might not have reports. So my personal workspace is because I have mostly test users that doesn't have. So if I go up here to a proper workspace, I will see that some of them have a lot of reports in them. So here I have my own personal workspace, and it has a bunch of reports in it. So it's gonna be sub-elements to the workspace. And this can be really helpful, if you can parse it well, you can go and get all the different things that are fit together. Now, this does not, doesn't make sure that you don't have to loop through something, because, for example, if you want to get all the refreshes, you will need to look through all the data sets to get all the refreshes on that. So you cannot, there's no way to chain a refresh together with a data set together with a report unless you do the looping. So that's something that you need to then write maybe a little bit more complex PowerShell, or you need to somehow handle it in a way. What I have done in many cases is that I have if I write a refresh out to a file, I will call the file, I will take one file per dataset, and I will call the file the dataset ID, so they can then chain it together if you want to make your life a little bit more easier. But there's a difference in what you want and what you can, so sometimes you need to be a little bit creative in this. So when you get the data in this kind of form, either as a tabular form or as a JSON, you will need to then, of course, as I said before, parse it somehow to get it somewhere. What I recommend with the artifact inventory is that you query the API every day, so once a day, and then you put all the data into a database. Now, how you get it into a database, that might be that you can handle it all in PowerShell or in your custom application, or maybe you will land it in JSON files or CSV files, and then you will pass it all into a database. But the most important thing is that you query it every day, so you will have a trend over time of what's going on in your environment. So what kind of objects are being created all the time. So what can you then, if you get this data, what could you then do with it? So I have a little example here of a report that is taking this data. So here, for example, we are looking at reports, and in this particular page in the report, I'm mixing a little bit of the data from the activity log to the data from the artifact inventory. So here I have, how many reports do I have? I have 86 reports. I have how many of those reports have existed, and you see I missed a day here, so that's why it's just going to be empty. And you can see my reports are growing, slowly but steadily. And then the rest of it is usage, but you can also mix those things together. And you can do the same thing for reports and workspaces. So I have here another one which is a workspace inventory. So it's basically telling you, I have these many workspaces. They are called this. This is the owner of them. As display name, and then all the related information, the reports and the data sets and all this. So I have a particular workspace here which has a dashboard and has a report and has a data set and all so on and so forth. So this is just some things you can do with it, but mixing it all together is where you will really get the benefit. So our third area of monitoring is the Power BI activities. So the Power BI activities is everything that's written to the audit log. So it will tell us important information about who is doing what, when, to what. So it can help to tell us about the adoption, so who is using Power BI, who is not using Power BI, who is looking at certain reports, or who is looking at modifying things, who is deleting, what are they doing, when are they doing it, and then if you want to look at something very specific, for example, when did this report get last accessed, or what data sources are being used by some different data sets. That is what is in the audit log, and that's where you can get rich information about what is going on in your environment. So this kind of information is the one that's really important for governance perspective. But as I said before, having the information about the artifact inventory combined with the activities is where you get really big benefits. But how do you go on and collect this? It's a little bit different than with the artifact inventory, or maybe not that different, but in some ways it's a little bit different. So let's go over to Power BI and let's see how we can do it. So here I'm back in Power BI and I'm in the admin portal, and I have clicked on the audit logs. And as you can see, there's a link that says go to Microsoft 365 Admin Center. So you cannot look at the audit log within the Power BI admin portal. Before, maybe in the last 6 months, you only could get the audit log out in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. Microsoft has improved a little bit in the meantime, but let's just take it in order and let's start with the classic one. So I'm going to go to the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. I have opened it already. I am logged in as an admin, and to have access to this particular place, so this Office 365 security and compliance and the audit logs in here, you have to be a auditor, or you have to be an Microsoft 365 admin. So there are two roles that you can give it to. There's also some custom roles that you can get it, but you can have a read-only access to this audit logs as being an auditor, or you can be an admin where you can do whatever you want. And this has traditionally been a really, really big ask. So a lot of organizations have said, okay, I don't want to give a Power BI admin the ability to look at all the logs in Microsoft 365, because that's what you get if you get access to this. There's no way to get only access to just Power BI. You can get its file and page activities, folders, SharePoint, everything in here. There's also Power BI, and there's something like 50, 60 Power BI activities that's been recorded to the audit log, and they are always getting more and more and more. So as I said, traditionally this has been really hard to get access to this. So this created a barrier, to meaning that a lot of people cannot collect it. If you have access to this and you want to collect this, there are two ways you can do it. One is a very manual way. I can go in here and I can say that I want to look at view dashboards and I want to look at view a Power BI report. I can check often different ones. Edit a Power BI report, publish to web or something like that, and I can say, okay, I have found all my activities I want to say, and I can tell you, oh, in what period do you want to have those? And I can say, search, give me, what happened in that period. So this is a very manual approach. So I will get, so in a well-functioning, proper organization, this is going to be a lot more. This is my demo tenant. So here I can see that these are the 5 activities that happened in that window for these particular activities. So I could have checked more. I cannot check all of them. There are too many to show here, but you can check whatever you want. I could then say I want to download the results, and it will download it as a CSV. This is the very manual approach, but this is something you can do if you want. Another thing you can do if you have access to the audit log here is you can use the Office 365 Management Activity API. This API will allow you to, it has endpoints that will allow you to access the audit log and will allow you to get it out. Now again, say if you have that access, this is a great place to get the audit log because it will give you all the whole thing. You will need to be sure, of course, that you need to filter on Power BI. So otherwise you will get all the logs for all the application of Microsoft 365, which is probably not what you want to do because that might have sensitive information. It might be a problem. Then again, in your organization, that might be what the approach you do. You take everything out into a data warehouse and then it's just split up after that. So Power BI data will be split up after that. That depends a little bit on how you approach this problem here. If you use the activity API, as with the other APIs that Microsoft has, that they have also created commandlets that will allow you to do it, or you can go straight against the API endpoints to go and get these. Here I have an example of a PowerShell script that is going against the Office 365 admin API and is getting the audit log out for Power BI. Now, see that they have a record type Power BI. This will only get the Power BI audit log out, not everything else. You need to be careful about this one. Another thing is that you have an end date and you have a start date, and those parameters, they will tell you what period you want. Now, the audit log in the Security and Compliance Center is by default only stored for 90 days. Now, your company, depending on the licenses, they might have changed that retention policy. They might have made it smaller, but they might have made it bigger if they have the right licensing in place. They can put it up to 6 months or up to 12 months. But no matter if it's 90 days or 6 months or 12 months or whatever it is, you will want to get the data out because you don't want it to disappear after that retention period. You want to have an audit trail that goes further back in there, especially if it's 90 days. 90 days to 3 months, that's not a long time. So you want to keep it more. So getting the data out, putting it into, now here I'm just putting it into a CSV file. You can put it into a database. I recommend that it at least ends in a database. Maybe it's fine to output it into a CSV file, but then put it into a database so that you have the data and you can go and have a further history than those 90 days. Now I'm not going to run this script because my admin user that I'm using, it has two-factor authentication, which makes it a little bit more problematic to run these things. What you always want to do with all those PowerShell scripts, you want to create a service account that runs them, and you want to put that into Key Vault. You want to do it properly. You don't want to just have it in a plain text in a script, but that's a whole nother story. So this is one way to get it. So you can use the management API for the Office 365. You can go on either manually in, or you can go on and you can create a PowerShell script, or again, you can create your own application that goes against the REST API. There's a lot of information out there, not specific to Power BI, but if you just want to see how to get data out of it, you can just, search for, the search unified audit log PowerShell commandlet or the endpoints of this particular API. And there's a lot of information online about, what approach is best if you want to do it in a different way than using PowerShell. Okay, so that is one way. But because of this issue, and I talked about before, the huge issue about having access to the security and compliance center here in Office 365, Microsoft decided that they needed to make the audit log at least partially available to Power BI Administrator. So what they did is that they created an endpoint in the admin part of the REST API, which we also had this, if you remember before, get the groups as admin. There is one here that is called Get Activity Events. This is a fairly new one, but it allows you, if you're just a Power BI administrator, you will be able to call this endpoint and get data out without having all that excessive access in the Microsoft 365 security and compliance center. Now there is a caveat to it, because this one will only get you the last 30 days of data. So if you're just starting now and you don't have any data, but you have Power BI activities for a longer time, if you can, it would be best to be able to access the first 90 days from the Microsoft 365 API, and then start using this API to get the rest. Of course, if you just get the access to the other one, you just use it. But if you get someone, a Microsoft 365 admin, to give you a dump of the data for the last 90 days, then you can use this endpoint to get the rest of it and get it, every day, as you roll it out. So this is very, very similar as we have seen before. So we're just gonna go and take a look at how it works and what it will give us. So now I'm back in PowerShell. Again, I am logged in with an administrator, so it's the same as before. And if I put in a PowerShell commandlet that Microsoft has created for this activity event, get activity event endpoint. So you can see that it's called get Power BI activity events. It's a commandlet that will point to the get activity event endpoint. It will require a start time, an end time, and that's really what it requires. And if you call it directly, if you call it without using the commandlet, it will also require a start date and end time. And the caveat here is that it has to be within the same day. So I cannot call all the 30 days in once. If I want to use this to get started, if I'm brand new and I want to get started, I would need to start by calling for 30 days ago, and then 29 days ago, 28, and so on and so forth. Now you can loop through it. I have an example of script I can show you that will loop through it, but otherwise this one will get you just one day. So I have added a convert from JSON here just because it's easier to see this in tabular format, but you don't have to do that. You can export it as a JSON, or you can export it as a whatever you want. So let me just run this just to give you an example. I just took one day in the middle of or in the beginning of September, because I know there is at least one activity on it. Well, there are a few more activities here, and you can see there are a few activities, and these are all the activities that have been done in this particular time frame. And you can see that some of them are done by so you can get groups as admin, that is calling the REST API, right? And you have exported activity events. And yeah, we have a bunch of activities, and you will tell you what has been done by whom, what user agent, and all these different things in here. Then you can put this into a database, and then you can start working on creating some kind of a report on it. Now note that depending on the event, it will give you different columns. So there's not the same columns for export sports activity events and get groups as admin. You can see there's different parameters in it. And you see there's this one has an extra parameter, but sometimes it's completely different. So you need to be aware of that when you create your schema. You put the data in, that you need to catch all the different columns for all the different events. And if you only have certain events that have happened so far, but then a new event happened, you might need to adjust that schema to get it. But you can also see in the documentation, you can see what all the columns that it will return, and you just create that instead. And as I said, if you're in the position that you are absolutely starting from scratch and you are on don't know, you don't want to go on and query one day at a time, you can create a loop that will just loop through each one of the days, and I will attach some examples to the PowerPoint you will get from this event. So as I said before, when you get this data out, then you might want to report on it, make sure it's accessible to people. At least you need to be able to tell people if you're compliant or not, and then what's going on. I have some ideas here that you might want to report on. I just want to show you a few of them just to make sure that you have some kind of context. So I have a small report here that has something like 10 pages, and you can see I start with an overview, and I have how many users do I have, how many are active, and they are active in that period where we have chosen. So I have 16 users in all, only 3 of them have been active, and same with reports, dashboards, and workspaces. I have, top something, top 10 workspaces, top reports, and then how many users have been active over time. Then I can look at specifically at user activity and you get more details on it. And here I have added, when were you last active as a user? So I have, 3 users that have been active in this period, and these users haven't been active for a long time. And I could, consider taking away their Power BI license, pro license, if they had one. And then you can go on and see who's the creators, who's the viewers, deletes, install app, which is, if you have an app on top of a workspace. Publish to web, of course, very important. You can see, there has been 2 publish to web in this particular tenant, and then you can see if they're, if there's something you want to stop or if there's authorized user doing it. Remember, I told you a little bit about the admin settings in the beginning. So here I can, see if something has been changed. I can see that publish to web had been changed at some point. And I will be able to see in the data what it changed to, but not what it changed from. So it's something you need to be, very well, but careful about. And then, download report from the server, import, which is basically published from Power BI desktop. There you can get all this information from here that it will allow you to see what's going on in your environment. Mixing the audit information with the artifact inventory is also where you can get great value, because then you can start seeing not only who did what when, but what did they do as well. And that is something that can give you great value. But you might want to, of course, have different reports for different purposes. You might want to have your artifact inventory, the pure inventory, might be open to everyone, because that's when people get inspired and ask for access to things that they normally wouldn't know existed. But the audit log is more more sensitive information, so you might want to have that in a separate report. Although those who are have approval for it, they could see that all mixed together. This is where you will get the greatest value from the data. As I said before, I also wanted to talk a little bit about automation. I have created this architecture here, which is a fairly simple one. The top line is if you're in the cloud, the bottom is if you're on premise. So basically, getting the data out of the REST API and the activity log, and optionally Azure Active Directory. Using PowerShell scripts, you can use them. If you're in the cloud, you can use them as an Azure Function app. If you're on premise, you can run it by using the SQL Server agent or something like that. Then you take the files that come out of it. I export it to files. I don't use PowerShell to do the whole manipulation, but you can do that if you're strong in PowerShell. I put out files, I put them into blob storage if I'm in the cloud, I put it into local storage if I'm on premise. Then I use my integration tool to move it from there to a data warehouse. And then I do some transformation and then reporting in the end. So basic pattern, but this is something that has worked really well for me. Okay, so last thing on the agenda is to see the objectives we had. We wanted to talk about why we should be monitoring Power BI. Hopefully you have know that now, that monitoring Power BI will give you a lot of data that will help you in your implementation effort, in your adoption, but in your governance effort as well. What you should be monitoring in Power BI, I suggested at least 3 areas, where it's the admin settings in the admin portal, it's the artifact inventory, and it's the activities. How you can monitor Power BI? Using the REST API, using the activity log, you can get the data out, put it into a database, so you have richer history than just a snapshot of your inventory or the last 90 days or 30 days of your activities. How can you report on data? Hopefully I showed you some examples. Hopefully they will inspire you to do your own reporting on it. There's no 2 organizations the same. If you want to get in touch, you can get in touch with any of these platforms here. You send me an email, use the Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm probably most responsive on Twitter, just connect with me and let's talk data if you're interested. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the session, hope you learned something, and hope you have a great rest of SQL Bits. Thank you.